Welcome everybody to Mudroom. Oh, have we, what? Oh, I've been here before. Yes, thank you. We have a really great night ahead of us. This is such a fun event for us to have you here. We're so glad you help support AVA through coming here. And first of all, I want to let you know that this is our holiday show and exhibition. All of this artwork on the walls is for sale, cash and carry, right? So by supporting the local artists, right? And by supporting AVA, by buying all this artwork, you're helping everybody else keep our programs low cost and some free programs for people as well. I would like to give a big round of applause and thank you to this event's coordinating committee and the volunteers that help run it. If you're here and you're a volunteer to help run Mudroom, please raise your hand. It takes a lot of people to put this on. Where's Rich? Okay. I particularly, and Cheryl Trainer, our office manager, is part of this committee. And there he is, the man of the hour, Rich Fedorchak, the person that checks you in. Rich, I have to tell you, it takes a lot to run AVA, period. We have a very small staff. We're a nonprofit organization making lots of art available to our community for free and low cost. And we absolutely could not do it without our volunteers. And I'm going to give a shout out to Rich because he is not only here on the Mudroom committee, he's a gallery sitter, he's an exhibition volunteer, so he patches and paints the walls before exhibitions. What else does Rich do? Everything. He helps us set up for events. And I'm going to ask you just unabashedly, we need more volunteers at AVA. So if you have any of those skills, if you just want to sit at a computer and do data entry, oh my God, isn't that sexy? Come on and talk to me. So yeah, really. So thank you, Rich. Thank you for our volunteers. We're always welcoming more volunteers. And without further ado, I am going to announce our first speaker tonight. Don. No? I don't get to do that. Sally will do that. Here's Sally Bacon, part of our committee.
She's trying to steal my thunder. So, pull it all the way down? Okay, all right. So, first of all, I love the Mudroom, and thank you so much for supporting us. And I am also a board member, and I just want to say nothing would happen here if it wasn't for Cheryl Trainer. I don't know where she is. Honestly, she keeps us together. And Rich also. Rich is like the volunteer from, he is something else. So thank you both so much. Judith Hertog, we've got Leanne Moshe, we've got Casey Carpenter on the team who couldn't be here tonight, Mike Lovell, and that's it, right? And Sally Bacon. Okay, so that's that. I want to encourage you to put your name in the hat for the at our intermission. We're going to pick a name out of the hat, and you can tell a story on family ties. Now, not everybody has wonderful family stories, I'm sure. And you could tell a story. It doesn't have to be a really good one. You could talk about that annoying, uncle or mother or father, so we're looking for names. Put them in the hat there so we have an audience story. And our next Mudroom theme, the next Mudroom is in March, and it is March, what's it say here? March 12th. And the subject is the worst advice ever. So we want stories for that. Go to our website, submit the stories. It's really fun, and it's not nerve-wracking being up here because you're all so nice. So tonight we're going to start off with Dawn Collish, and Dawn is a family physician who's been trying to retire forever. And we were asking each of the storytellers if they have any siblings, and he has one older sister that's just a year older than him. And he said they're like twins, like Irish twins, only they're not Irish. So, Dawn, you're up.
Well, thanks so much for coming. If I get nervous and I wander away from the mic, will you be able to hear me? No. So if I get nervous, I'll have to stay at the mic. Okay. Well, again, thanks so much for coming. I met my friend Scott at the emergency room at the Cottage Hospital up in Woodsville. It's about 45 miles north of here. It's a small, rural logging and farming community. And I'm a family doctor. We sort of soup to nuts. You know, we do a little bit of everything. And the fact that I was meeting my friend Scott there, Scott and I cut and split wood together for our families. And he was also my patient. And that actually happens a lot. A lot of my friends are my patients, and some of my patients become my friends. And he told me that he had the worst headache of his life. So I met him at the emergency room to figure out if he had something really scary and dangerous like meningitis or a bleeding aneurysm. And he was nervous. I was a little bit nervous, but when I did the spinal tap, I wasn't nervous at all. I mean, it's a very technical thing, and you just have to have all of your focus on the procedure. So the fact that he was my friend really did not enter into it. I was very delighted to see that the spinal fluid was nice and clear. So that is a good sign. And then I sent the spinal fluid off to the lab for some tests, and Scott said, Don, while the labs are cooking, why don't you go and see Carol? And he was right. I did have another patient. His wife, Carol, was in active labor just down the hall with their second child. And I was her doctor, too. And because, well, I said soup to nuts, and actually, it's also like womb to tomb. And so I went down, and the labor floor nurse met me, and she said, "Oh, Don, I'm so glad that you're here. Carol is in very active labor. The contractions are coming. They're stronger. They're coming more often." She said, I was going to call you and have you come and check her. So I checked her cervix, and indeed, as I suspected, she was in what's called transition. Her cervix was fully dilated, and she was ready to push. And Carol was a great pusher. I mean, she just bore down, and that baby came down. And my job is to just sort of, she does all of the work. My job is just to control the head as it comes down. And I wish I had controlled it a little bit better, because there was a tear, of the vaginal tissue towards the back. But she was a beautiful baby girl. She was pink. She was crying. It was a lovely delivery. And while I was sewing up the tear, the labor floor nurse and Carol both asked me, "How's Scott?" And I said, he's doing okay. But then the labor floor nurse said, "Don, I just got a call from the med surg nurse, and she said that Mildred is not doing so well." And Mildred was Carol's grandmother, who I had admitted the day before with pneumonia. So I walked down the hall to the medical floor and checked in on Mildred, and indeed she was not doing so well. Her breathing was labored. She was somnolent. I was a little bit worried that the antibiotics that I had put her on were perhaps not working, but she had made it very clear that she did not want any heroic measures, and I felt that we probably we're doing all that could or should be done. So I went back down the hall, checked in on Carol. She was a little bit sore, but the bleeding had slowed down. And I stopped at the lab and got the results of Scott's spinal tap. I got permission from both Carol and the labor floor nurse to take the new baby down to show her to her dad. And Scott was thrilled. I didn't let him hold the baby. I still wasn't sure about the infection, but I told him that it was probably a viral meningitis that was going around the community at that time, and he'd be feeling a lot better in a week. Brought the baby back to Carol, and then I returned to the medical unit, and the nurse was sitting with Mildred, who at this point was comatose. And so I sat down and took her hand, and I told her that she had a beautiful new baby great-granddaughter with blonde hair and a dimple. I don't know if she heard me. I'd like to think that she did. I did not think that she had that much longer to be with us. And I sat there for a while, just thinking about Mildred and Carol and Scott and their new baby, and those wonderful nurses who took care of these people. And then I thought about my own great good fortune to be a family doctor. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Rob Van Alst, and Rob immigrated to the Upper Valley from the Netherlands. And the woman he's going to be, the girlfriend in the story, actually is now his wife. He has one younger sister. So Rob, are you here? Yeah, I am. Okay, you're on. Rob's on.
Wow. Big audience. Thanks for coming out. So I met my wife in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch. I grew up there, born and raised. And my then girlfriend came to the Netherlands to go to medical school. And after we had been, together for 4 or 5 years, things were getting pretty serious, and we were talking about getting married. And after we decided that yes, we wanted to get married, we were, exchanging stories about marriage. And one of the first stories that came up was Emily telling about the experience of her sister, her oldest sister, who, when she wanted to get married with her boyfriend, he actually went to her father and asked for his blessing. And, that was a great experience because, the dad said, of course, yes. And they had a great evening. They bonded over cigars and whiskey. And it really resonated with me. And why did it? I think it has to do with the fact that my own father died pretty young. I was 11 at the time. He was 41. And it's not that I was, looking for a new father, but just the idea of, bonding with the father of your wife. Why not? That seemed like a great idea at the time. My own father was not a doctor like Emily's father. He was a blue-collar guy, a contractor, had his own crew. When I was a kid, I sometimes was able to go with him. I did not do a lot of work, but I was just hanging out with the boys, and there were like crew jokes, camaraderie, and I really loved it. So I have very fond memories of my own dad. Anyhow, we decided, yes, we were going to do that, and we booked a flight to Boston, where my where Emily is from, and went there for about a week. First night, we were sitting at the dinner table, and I was trying to kind of bring it up, I'd like to speak to you, and I was about to say that, and he said, "So you're not a doctor?" And I said, no, I'm not a doctor. And you have to, besides the fact that he's a doctor and that, Emily was just finishing med school, she has 4 other siblings, 3 of them are doctors. And there's just one brother who really went against his will and did not become a doctor, became a medical ethicist, which was, really pushing the envelope. So I tried to make contact with him. The second night, he didn't even show up for dinner because the guy was very busy. Third night, I posted with his study, and I said, when I saw him come in, I said, can I meet with you? I'd like to ask you a question. And he said, well, Thursday night at 7 o'clock, I have time for you. Okay. I thought, okay, better 7 o'clock on a Thursday night than not at all. I mean, that's why I'm here, right? So I went to his study at 7 o'clock, knocked on the door, he opened the door, and, like a small room with a desk and tons of papers. And in the far corner of that room was a small slipper chair. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. It was like sitting on the ground. It was really low slung. And he pointed to that slipper chair with the idea that I was supposed to sit there. Well, I did. I sat there. I went to sit there, and I felt like I was sitting on the floor, and he was sitting there on this, it seemed almost like a throne. And he said, what do you want to ask me? And I said, well, Emily and I, we really, love each other, and we'd love to get married, and it would mean a lot to me if you could, give me your blessing. It stayed a little bit quiet for too long a time. And he said, well, I normally do not give my opinion unsolicited, but now you're asking for it. Your father, he really died young, and I would hate to see it, that Emily would end up with small children by herself after your death. I cannot give you my blessing. And I was sitting there, and I said, oh my God, I said, but, what do you want? If I cannot marry Emily, what should I do? And he said, do you really want my opinion? I said, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm here. Well, he said, your father died of a heart attack. He obviously has bad genes. Why pass those on? I mean, I wouldn't. I didn't know what to say, and I said, but, so are you saying that I shouldn't marry at all? Is that what you're saying, that I shouldn't marry at all? And he said, do you really want my opinion? So why are you asking me that question of? I mean, of course I want your opinion. Well, he said, my children ask me my opinion a lot of times. It never seems to get across very well. And I thought by myself, no surprise there. So I said, yes, I want your opinion. Well, he said, there were really truly great men who chose not to procreate. Gregory Mendel comes to mind, this great monk scientist. I think you should become a monk. At that point, I was flabbergasted. I could not think at all. It's not true. I was thinking, there's probably not going to be any cigars tonight. Anyhow, this was time to wrap it up, of course, because this was not going anywhere. I left the room. I was pretty shaken. And I told Emily, I told her what happened. And of course, we were upset and disappointed, and said, what next? She said, my mom is actually coming back from work. She's coming back with the tea. Why don't we pick her up from the tea station? She'll know what to do. That's what we did. We went to the tea station. We picked her up. And at the moment that I saw her, actually, I pretty much, started sobbing. All the emotions came out. And I told her what happened, and she said, "You did what? You idiot!" And she took us to an Irish pub close by, ordered a couple of really big pints for us, and told her, the last time I listened to advice of your father was a long time ago. So I really bonded with her that night, you can imagine, and proved the old man wrong. I'm still here. I have a beautiful daughter. Do everything in my power to stay healthy, to enjoy her for a long time, and live a blessed life. Thank you.
But the important question is, how old are you? Thank you very much. That was a great story. Next, we have Margot O'Day. And Margaret has told stories here before. And she's the oldest of 7 children. And at one point, she fed her little brother, cat food when he came home drunk. Margot. Yeah, that is her.
So this is about ties that bind, and mine are real. It's called clothesline. We came over here from Germany, me and my mother, and by the time, for my 5th birthday, my mother gave me another brother, which brought the total to 3. And her and my father had been fighting, and they got in a huge fight. Can't hear you. Okay, now?
A little louder.
Thanks, Rob. Anyways, they got in a huge fight. My mother was a mean person, and she got really, really mad. So she called my grandfather in Germany, and my opa sent the money, and we were on our way back to Germany on a ship. And so my mother, a newborn, and 3 kids. And we're on the ship, and they have these things called lifeboat drills. So my mother opens up her suitcase, pulls out a clothesline. She'd made 3 little nooses in it. She tied it around her waist and put our wrists through these nooses, and we went up deck. I didn't think it's unusual. I'm 5. I could care. And the purser up there looks at her, and she goes, "What is that?" And she says, "Do you know what the Titanic was? Those people lost their kids because they didn't have clothesline. Now get out of my way." So we got to Germany. My father, who was devastated because my mother said, "That's it, I'm done," wrote letters. He was calling her for a year. And she finally said, "Okay, I'll go back." So back to the States, same clothesline, only this time the guy did not question us whatsoever. And we get home. My father's all happy to see us. So when I'm 9, my father comes home and goes, "I bought a house on Jones Hill in Enfield." This house is a 1-room schoolhouse with 6 acres of land. It was a good deal, as far as he was concerned. Not my mother so much, but by that time, there were 5 of us kids. And my mother and father in a 1-room schoolhouse, and it had running cold water, no hot water. And my mother pointed this out to my father. He goes, "Oh, I'll take care of that." She says, "We also need a washer because there's no laundromat anywhere close." The nearest neighbor was a ways. So my father says, oh, my father was one of those guys that had a lot of friends. So he drove out in his truck, and he came back a while later with a wringer washer and a reel of clothesline. And my mother's like, what is this? He said, well, I bartered for it. My father was a stonemason. He says, I'm building a wall for the guy for this. So I was excited because it's something new. You're a kid. My mother showed me how to, you load this up and you do this and you do that. And we're off to the races. Thing is, the washer, the head of it, if you overload it, would spin around and whack you. And then if you tried to unplug it, sparks would shoot out of it. But we just continued. There's clothesline strung up outside everywhere. And we found clothesline invaluable. We had thousands of feet of it. So we played with it. We made swings, pulled sleds, pulled go-karts. Later in life, we hooked bumpers onto cars and kept the doors closed when they wouldn't do that. Everything, clothesline could fix anything. So my mother became pregnant again. By this time, I was 12. And she had my little sister. My father had added on to the house a little bit. And my little sister was allergic to milk. So Dr. Brown said, get goat's milk. Great. So that involved getting goats. Now, my dad liked animals, and he also liked to drink. And there's this place in Thetford called Gray's Auction. Back in the day, it used to be the place where you went to buy your animals. My mother had sent him previously to get chickens. She said, well, we'll get some chickens, we need eggs. He went with my grandfather, and that wasn't a good mix. And he came home with 22 chickens, 10 ducks, 3 geese, and a certified beagle that was supposed to run rabbits. But James P. Beagle did not like being in the woods at all, was afraid of the dark, and didn't like his feet wet, and spent the next 15 years on my mother's couch. So where we lived in Enfield is on top of a hill. At the bottom of this hill is a place called Kluger's on Sunset Hill. And it was an inn for German. A lot of Germans went there that had come over after the war. And I never quite got what they did. They'd come, they'd eat, they'd walk through the woods, walk by my house. My mother, every time she saw him, she goes, be good or leave, because we're supposed to be perfect little kinder. And then they'd go home, take naps, and get up and eat again. And they did this all summer. So we got the goats. My father got 3 of them, which was a little excessive. I thought I saw the goats, and I had just read Heidi, so I was like, I'm going to milk goats. That lasted a day. And then my father made me keep milking goats for a while. But we kept them in the old chicken coop because the chickens by now were living in the trees. And my mother wasn't happy about the whole deal. My mother was the type of person, my father couldn't kill anything. My mother's, you'd say, what's for dinner? She'd go, chicken, grab her knife and go outside. Come back with a chicken. So the goats kept escaping, and by now there were 3 more goats because he failed to realize that they were pregnant. So we had 6 goats. And my mother's getting a little irritated at this point. She put in a huge garden. She had huge flower gardens. And the goats like to go visit and take down whole rows of beans. And my mother said, you better figure out a way to take care of the goats. So my dad said, okay, we got clothesline. So he hooked their collars to the clothesline and hooked that to a cement block. Cement blocks have holes in them, so you just wrap it around and tie it. Only thing is, it's like having lawnmowers because they just go around in circles. And you move the block and they go around in circles again and again. So it's summertime. One of the things my mother was insane about was the Red Sox. And the Red Sox were playing the Yankees. It was a big game. She got my brother up on the roof because we got channel 8 and channel 3. The Red Sox only came in on channel 3. So my brother had to go on the roof and tie the antenna in the direction exactly channel 3 that morning. She called a friend, Faye Siemens, who lived down the road, and said, come on, Red Sox are playing, bring the beer. So they're all settled, they're got the beer, they're watching the Red Sox. My mother was very into the Red Sox. She didn't want anybody to disturb her, couldn't say nothing. Well, except for the goats. Because the goats had figured out if they could chew through the clothesline. They actually liked it. And goats can climb. So the goats all escaped. And they were running all over the place. But one of them still had horns and had gone onto the cement wall across the road, had managed to climb up the tree and got the rope tangled in the branch, and then sort of fell. So it was hanging in the tree. So I ran into the house and said, Ma, the goat's hanging in the tree. And my mother's watching the Red Sox. And she goes, I don't care if it dies. I said, Ma, the Germans are coming. Because you could see them coming from far away. My mother was like, God damn it. She grabbed her butcher knife, which is her thing that she killed chickens and everything else with. I said, oh, dead goats. And she's running down the road wearing her Red Sox shirt and yelling. She used to yell in German, just as the Germans are coming up the street. And my mother's yelling and swearing in German on top of her lungs. And they take one look and turn around and run. And I've never seen people run so fast in my life for anybody that age. So my father came home, and by now my mother's livid. There's goats everywhere, and she's like, get the goats. I don't care what you do with them. Just take them. And my father, at this point, knew not to say a word because she had a knife. And her friend Faye Siemens at this point is drunk and saying, guess what happened in the game? So she wasn't happy. So he loads the goats onto the truck. And he's going back to the auction with my grandfather. And I said, okay, we'll see what happens now. Comes back 4 hours later. By now my mother's pretty calm. Red Sox have won. She's in a good place. He goes, guess what? I said, oh, this isn't going to be good. And my mother comes outside, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. And he had a cow. It was a cute cow. It was one of those Swiss cows, brown Swiss. And we named her Taffy. And he had her by the clothesline. And he's looking around, and I'm like, Dad, where are you going to keep this cow? I'll put it in the old chicken shed. And I was like, oh my God. To this day, I have clothesline in my trunk of my car. Everybody in my family carries clothesline, and I hang up my clothes. Thank you very much.
Well, that does it for this half. Now it's intermission, and intermission will be 10 to 15 minutes. But we want you to put a story in the basket so we can choose an audience story. So, let's go.
As we begin the second half, I want to thank the band. We forgot to thank the band earlier. Thank you to Sweet Magnolia. And they do take tips if you enjoy the music. I also want to thank the PON, who provided the food. Always wonderful food. And before we do our raffle, we want to, we got some submissions from the audience. So the idea is that one person from the audience who submitted their name here will just tell an impromptu story of less than 10 minutes. If it's more than 10 minutes, we're going to drag you off the stage. Do you want to? Sure. Leanne, you want to pick it one? Okay. Okay. So we will do the raffle afterwards. The person whose name we picked, you have 1 minute to think about this. We got a submission from Sue Hagerman. Is that right, Sue? Sue, are you here? Are you still?
Not yet.
Not yet. You can. We're going to do the raffle. This is just 1 minute while we do the raffle. You can gather your thoughts. Are you still ready? Are you still in for this? Yes.
Yes, they are.
Okay. And after 10 minutes, we'll drag you off the stage. No. Okay. Yes. So now it's time for the raffle. We have 3 prizes. We have 2 pairs of tickets and 1 family membership. So let's start with, this is a prize for 2 free tickets. And the name we got here.
Unbelievable. I don't know what that says. Let's see.
Read the number.
M. It's somebody who lives at box 222 in Lyme.
And there's an M and an A?
Oh, Michael Whitman.
Okay.
And then
Another person.
Another
This
person.
is again for 2 tickets. And the name we got here is Linda Hicks. Hicks. Woohoo! So I don't think you need to do anything. We have your name.
and then this one.
And then the last one is for a family membership for AVA Gallery. And the name we got here is
Kaneen.
Kaneen? Yes, Kaneen?
All right.
And I have a phone number here, so I think we can find you with your phone number.
Okay. Let me get rid of those.
Okay. And Sue, you have a story. You have the floor. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks. So my forebears on my mother's side come from Wales, and had my grandfather and grandmother not emigrated to a little tiny town called Venedocia, Ohio, they never would have met because they were from different parts of Wales. So Venedocia means home, or this is where I came in Welsh. My grandmother was probably illegitimate, the daughter of a housemaid and probably some person of wealth. And she was sent to America at 18 to take care of her aunt. She came through Ellis Island alone and completely unknowing what she was getting into, just that she was coming to a Welsh community. And she then met my grandfather and proceeded to have 6 kids. My mother was the 4th of those 6 kids. And my grandmother lived with us when I was growing up. She lived half-time in Michigan with my family and half-time in California in the winter with my uncle and his family. My earliest memories have to do with my 9, which is grandmother in Welsh, and my mother making plum puddings for the entire family. All 6 of their siblings and all of the kids. I remember, so my grandmother died when I was 6, so I was very young. I remember the smells of cinnamon and cloves. I remember helping sift flour, helping stir. And I remember these 2 giant turkey roasters that the plum puddings would be made in 2 batches and put in coffee cans. And they would boil. And they would be packaged and sent to California and sent to, I think, Chicago at that time for my uncle's family. And then the other 4 plum puddings would be shared among the Michigan families. So at some point, my mother made my 9 stop and measure each ingredient, because this was not a written recipe. And I don't know if you know, but in the old days, they either boiled puddings in cloths in a boiling pot of water, or you've seen probably in the King Arthur catalog, the pudding molds, coffee cans. These were really important. They were cheap, you could send them, you cut out the bottom, you shove the plum pudding out. You put brandy on it, you flame it, and you serve it with tons of really amazing hard sauce, with brandy and the hard sauce. So the American kids, my generation, thought plum puddings were kind of weird, because they had all these strange ingredients in them. And they were a consistency. Being in Michigan, we didn't know from Boston brown bread, but that was the closest kind of thing you could know. So every year we had these plum puddings. I'd help, and my grandmother finally wrote down each of the steps in the recipes. After my grandmother died, my mother took over the plum pudding legacy, and she did it for many years. And plum puddings then went to Florida, New York, Michigan, California. And to send a plum pudding in those days was okay, because there weren't bombs that went through the mail. Mom did them until I got married and didn't come home every year. At that point, she was in her late 60s, and I decided I needed to take on this legacy. Coffee cans started going out of style, so I'd collect as many coffee cans as I could. I made the plum puddings, 2 big batches. They'd go to Alpena, Michigan, they'd go to Denver, they'd go to California. They went all over. And I discovered that my cousins, who hadn't really liked the plum puddings so much in the old days, you get the best quality ingredients, and you get King Arthur, the candied fruit that's moist, unlike that icky, dry, dead stuff in the supermarket, and black walnuts. And all of a sudden, all my cousins wanted them. So I was on the plum pudding machine. Only coffee cans started going away. So I'd beg my cousins, please send me coffee cans. One year I had to buy 6 cans of Melita coffee because they were the only coffee cans the co-op was carrying, because they're now all coming in plastic. So then I started having to come up with improvisations for things to do, and my beloved Enfield postmaster figured out how we could get the plum pudding in a prepaid envelope. If any of you work for the post office, don't bust him, because he saved me thousands of dollars over the years. So we'd tape them up and we'd send them. Over the last couple of years, I ended up having to use steel tumblers, glass vases. Not so good. Finally, I got the bright idea to buy beakers, science beakers. And so I had these beakers. Well, I figured my mom died last year, and I've been doing plum puddings for over 30 years. And one of my first cousins, once removed, said, someday I'd like to do puddings. So she just got a huge box of beakers. Excellent. So King Arthur is no longer carrying the really great dried fruit or candied fruit, except it costs $8 bazillion. There's a great place called nuts.com. So my cousin Shannon has just received the handwritten recipe my mom wrote from Nine's recipe, 6 beakers, and a whole bunch of dried fruit. And a 4th generation is now carrying on the plum pudding legacy.
Sue, thank you so much. Do you take orders?
I will share the recipe.
Okay.
Better than the one Sonia Hakala.
Okay, I may come back for that. I may may hold you to that. And this is also a good reminder that you don't have to prepare to be a professional storytellers to come up here to tell a story. We really want everybody's stories here, and we're always looking for new storytellers. So please consider submitting a story for the next mudroom, which is going to be on March 12th. And the theme is the worst advice. So if you have a story about really, really bad advice, send us an email. And actually, the submission process is, well, we just want a very short summary of your story. You tell us what your story is about and what happens in the end. Just short, few hundred words or the guidelines on how to submit here on the program that you most. And another way to submit a story is on your phone. There's a little audio recording app, or you can download that. You can also just record yourself and tell a summary of your story in 2 minutes, and then email that to us, okay? Promise to send us your stories. We're always looking for new storytellers. And I promise, there's so many people say that they don't know how to tell a story, that they have stage fright. People do it. And the best stories are from people who say, oh yes, some wine can also help. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So, and also we do a rehearsal with the storytellers. So we boost each other and help you improve your story. So please, really, really send us your stories. And one other thing that I recommend is organize storytelling events at home with your friends and family. And that way you discover all kinds of stories you didn't even know you had. It's a fun way to get together and get to know each other and tell stories. So, without further ado, we are ready for the next storyteller. And we asked each storyteller about their siblings. And I found a pattern. It seems that all our storytellers are the oldest sibling. Turns out maybe the younger ones never have a chance to speak. Or So our next storyteller, Amanda Anderson, or Miss Amanda, is the oldest of 3, and she has 1 younger sister and 1 younger brother. Welcome, Amanda.
Hello, everyone. Is my voice okay? Yeah? And this story is also about food, so thank you for setting that up, because my family ties are made from sugar and butter. They're made from flour in chocolate bars. Hershey's bars, Mom said, only the best. And for our middle class, middle American family, Hershey's was the best. We didn't do generics, and we didn't even know about the fancy stuff. So my mom got into baking because of my father, who was into the old world Scandinavian tradition of coffee time. He was a farmer. We have a farm in northern Illinois, and he would come in for coffee every day promptly at 10 a.m. or 3 p.m., no matter what he was doing. He was in the house for coffee, and of course, if you're going to drink coffee, you need something sweet to go with the coffee. And when my mom married him, she started baking crispy chocolate cookies, cherry pies, lemon bars, triple chocolate cake. You get the idea. And miraculously, my dad stayed thin, and none of us became diabetic. which was a blessing. And their first Christmas together, they decided to have a coffee time around the holidays for their rural neighbors. And Mom had learned to bake from her Norwegian mother. Both my parents are part Norwegian. And so she made about 15 different types of kind of your classic bland, buttery, deep-fried Scandinavian cookies, such as fattigmannsbakkels and krumkaka and sandbakkels, and my favorites, which were the rosettes. Rosettes are deep-fried on these irons, and one of the irons that Mom had looked like a star, and one looked like an open-petaled rose. So she would deep-fry them, and then when the cookies had cooled enough, she would take them off the irons and dip them in sugar, and so there was this delicate fried dough rose in your hand, and eating it is just like crunching sugared air. So Mom definitely knew her cookies, but the second year, she hadn't planned on doing another cookie party. She was very pregnant with me, but someone had sent her an early Christmas card saying, "Oh, won't you host the party? It was such a nice time." So Mom hosted the party, and I was there. I was 2 weeks old at the cookie party. And Mom hosted it again the next year when she was pregnant with my sister, and I was a baby, and she hosted it again when she had me and my sister as toddlers and my 6-week-old brother. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized how insane it was to make cookies and host a party when you had 3 children under the age of 3 in the house. But my mom is the type not to let on when she's exhausted. She's the type to push through and keep going and make more cookies. So, and Mom loved to experiment with new recipes. So every year there were more cookies and more cookies, because if you were at the party and you expressed a like for her peanut butter blossoms or her raspberry crumb bars, she would remember that and make it again the next year for you. And she might even hand you some extra for you to have. And so by the time Mom's cookie career apexed, she was making 44 different types of cookies and candies by herself. And yeah, at the cookie party, they would be in these big trays and circular rows next to the punch bowl full of the pink frothy punch. And yeah, it was really something. The fact that she did them all by herself. People at the party would ask us children, sitting there in our stiff Sunday clothes, if we helped our mommy make the cookies. But the answer was always, oh no, because Mom's cookies had to be perfect. And children are notoriously not perfect. So you would think having a mother making all of these cookies would be a child's dream come true, but we were somewhat ambivalent about it. My brother didn't have a very developed palate, and he turned up his nose at Mom's cookies and ate Oreos instead. And for my part, I did like some of Mom's cookies, but the woman got up at 3 a.m. every day from Thanksgiving until the Sunday before Christmas. She was kind of a raging bitch through most of the holidays. So I would have rather she made like 10 types of cookies and wasn't so difficult. So at any rate, that was that. And there was only the one cookie we sometimes help with, just because it was so time consuming. She tried to get us to help, was her cream wafers. She would roll out the dough, and we weren't allowed to do that because the dough had to be the exact perfect thickness. And we could stamp the cookie, use the circular cookie cutter to stamp it. And we could use the fork to make the tines. But if the tines didn't line up, or if we didn't measure the cookies perfectly, we were banished from the kitchen and got to go watch TV. So as a result, I did not become a baker. I did not bring any cookies to this event, so you can just forget about that. And I didn't need to bake, because even as an adult, when I moved 1,000 miles away down south to New Orleans, Louisiana. That's where I picked up the nickname, Miss Amanda. And Mom would mail me boxes of cookies. Why would I need to bake anything? So I was in New Orleans one year around Christmas time, and instead of baking, I was doing various things, which is subject for upcoming mudrooms. But this time I was training on a hanging trapeze. I was going to perform with some friends in an event called Drama Rama. And the Drama Rama began one evening when my friend was showing me a new move. And the move is, so the hanging trapeze is about 10 feet above the ground. There's a bar and there's 2 lines that hang, the bar hangs from. And the move is you go up and you hang upside down by your knees, and then one leg straightens and you wrap it around the line and you hold yourself with the flexion of your ankle and one knee. So my friend showed me the move, and I was practicing on the low bar, was safe. And then she went to the bathroom, and I'm not a baker like my mother, but I like things to be perfect. So I was like, well, I'll try on the high bar by myself. So I hopped up on the high bar and I got in the position. And like my mother, I also tended to push past my exhaustion. And so when my ankle came undone and I was hanging by one knee, I didn't have the energy to reach my hands up and save myself. So instead, I fell 10 feet onto my back. Had we been in a professional facility, we might have had a crash pad like this, but as it were, my bohemian friends and I were in an abandoned warehouse, and the mat was about this thick. So I was screaming bloody murder, but my friends weren't that concerned because I could still move my fingers and toes. And one of them suggested maybe I try walking, but I was just in too much pain to even consider it. And fortunately, one of the guys could tell my pupils had dilated, that I was in shock. And it was also very fortunate that I had health insurance at the time. I didn't always in New Orleans, but I did at that time, and so they called me an ambulance. And even at the ER, they weren't that concerned. They did x-rays, but weren't that concerned until they saw the x-rays. And the ER doc ran into the room shouting, "Get her on the board, get her on the board, she's broken her back." And indeed, I had cracked one of my vertebrae in the fall and crushed the other one. This was December 13, and I had no family there, I had no partner, and 1,000 miles away, my mom was up to her elbows in cookie dough. But Mom flew down to be with me in the hospital, and we had to wait about 3 days before we could have the spinal fusion surgery. My spinal cord was fine, but because it was vulnerable, being surrounded as it was by a crushed vertebrae, that they wanted the neurologist, whose name was, I'm not making this up either, Dr. Payne. They wanted him to coordinate a schedule with the orthopedic surgeon, who's, again, not making this up, Dr. Billings. So for 3 days, we waited for Dr. Billings and Dr. Payne. I couldn't do a thing. I was stuck on my back. Anything out of arm's reach, Mom had to fetch for me. She had to brush my hair. But we made it. The surgery was very successful, and then I was moved to the rehab unit. And the rehab unit was left a little to be desired. The drugs weren't as good. The care wasn't as good. There was a guy behind a curtain who screamed periodically through the night. So I wasn't in the best mental space, let's just say that. And my mom came in a couple days after the surgery with a sheepish look on her face. Would I mind if she flew back to Chicago so she could host her cookie party? Even though I was high on Vicodin, my heart broke a little. I'd always suspected that Mom loved the cookies more than us, and well, this was pretty convincing proof. And she asked it, but you probably had loved ones ask you a question, and it's not a question, right? I was helpless in the hospital. What could I say? Don't go. I guess I was also a little stoic like my mother, and so she flew to Chicago, and it was all right. I had friends that come to stay with me. One of my good friends from grad school, Henry, was with me in that hospital every day. He didn't stay all that long, but he came every day, what my own mother did not do. So yes, have I talked about it with therapists years later? Yes. Am I still talking about it tonight? Yes. Was I angry? Oh, yes. The kind of anger that kind of simmers down deep. And it was a few years later when Mom herself ended up in the hospital. Age 73, she had a stubbornly dislocated hip, stayed in the hospital for a night, and hosted her party the week later. Then I thought, maybe I shouldn't take this so personally. Maybe my mom is just nuts. Or more to the point, I think Mom had, it was her way. The cookies were not really something to eat, although people ate them. They were a way of showing the world that everything's just fine. Just because I was in the hospital a week ago, I'm hosting a party, there's all these cookies, eat, everything's fine. My daughter's 1,000 miles away in a hospital, don't worry about it, have some cookies. So anyway, the story has a happy ending because after the cookie party, Mom flew back to New Orleans, and she got there in time to help me get discharged on Christmas Eve. She wheeled me out of the hospital and came home, and she made a roast for me and my friends, and it was a really sweet Christmas, one of the best Christmases I've had, because it was the only Christmas I had my mom all to myself. And after my friends went home, Mom, who's an alto in her church choir, and I stayed up late singing Christmas carols. I fell asleep as she sang Holly Jolly Christmas to me. And it was memorable for another reason. It was the first time I'd heard anyone criticize my mother's baking. And this was my friend Henry, who was there for dinner, and after dinner, you know there were cookies. Mom brought plenty of cookies, but he wasn't really eating them. And I said, Henry, what do you think of Mom's cookies? And he said, well, they're pretty, but for me, they're a little too sweet. The end.
Thank you so much, Miss Amanda. And our next storyteller is my teammate from the mudroom, Leanne Moshe. And she is, again, the oldest sibling of only 3. She has 2 younger brothers, but she has 37 first cousins. Leanne.
When I was growing up, I wanted nothing more than a grandmother. And in my family, that means a nanny, because my family's from Italy. My dad's mom, Anna Caggiano, came to the United States from Italy as a young woman and married my grandfather, who was from a neighboring village in Italy, and that's how you did it. Likes like. And she had 10 children who lived to adulthood, and many who did not. She was widowed at a fairly early age, and she didn't live that long herself. And when I was only 6 months old, she died. And what I have from that grandmother is a black and white photograph of her lying in, very close to death with a kind of a satin blanket, which I'm sure they got specially for the photograph. She was surrounded by her 10 children, and the youngest of her 10 was getting married. So this was a kind of part of the wedding photography. And so what I see is my grandmother, who I have no other memories of, surrounded by her 10 children who were really filled with grief. My maternal grandmother, Teresa Di Gianni, came also to the United States from southern Italy for an arranged marriage. She had never met my grandfather. She came to the United States, to Boston. He was also from her part of Italy. And they lived in the town where I grew up and had 5 children. Her husband also died as a young man, and she also died surrounded by her family, but in a very different way. So the story is that my grandmother and her 5 kids, and those that were married, their partners, and the grandchildren, and on this day in August 1951, there were 4 grandchildren, would gather together at my aunt's home for a Sunday dinner, and there would be, Italian food that you might imagine and can be jealous about. And we would spend the day together. And this Sunday, we were outside, my 3 cousins and myself, my aunts and uncles, and my grandmother. And there was a big black shiny sedan. Someone had a car, and the car started to roll. And my grandmother, who didn't drive and didn't know anything about automobiles, was afraid that it was going to hit her grandchildren, and so she stood to brake the car, and she was killed in the presence of her children-in-law, and her grandchildren. So I was a year and a half when this grandmother died. And I have this vivid memory of what everything looked like, which I don't know if it's real or it's from the telling. But what I have about that grandmother is really the real grief that my family carried from this terrible accident, which I didn't understand growing up. But I didn't have a grandmother, and I really wanted one, because it looked so great when I saw people with these older women. I even asked the woman across the street if she would be my grandmother, and she didn't say yes, which was pretty crushing. But I kind of soldiered on. Well, I became a mother, and then my mother became the nanny. And it was pretty sweet watching her with my 2 children and her other 7 grandchildren. And my mother also was widowed as a young woman, so she was in her 40s when my dad died. So the men didn't have much going in my family for long lives. But I watched her with my kids, and she was affectionate, very sweet with them, asking questions, and then they would tell her about their lives, things that she couldn't, I mean, I could barely imagine. She couldn't imagine what they were doing and where they were going, but she was always just, couldn't do anything wrong, and it was very sweet. But, you know, I was busy. I was the mother. She was the grandmother. I was kind of watching, but I can't say I watched that closely. Fast forward, and I became a grandmother about 1.5 years ago, so I'm the nanny now. And, you know, I watched and looked at my share of pictures from my friends of their, oh, isn't he cute, your grandson? And, oh, yeah, she's very sweet. And, you know, I kind of did the obligatory, oh, that's nice. And then Joan was born, and I have a phone full of photos. If anybody has time later, I'd be really, really happy. I mean, hundreds of photos, videos, everything, Halloween costumes, you name it. But this relationship with this little person was beyond my imagining, is beyond my imagining. And the interesting thing is, you know, I'm the nanny, and Joan is 1.5, and my mother is 96.5, and she's the super nanny, is the word in the family, and she's the super nanny to 6 great-grandchildren. And in my life today, I am on the phone or on FaceTime with the 1.5-year-old, not with my mother, she can't deal with computers, but a lot of phone conversations and a lot of, you know, face-to-face time. And it's a little bit like this, you know, like I call my mother. Mom, who's this? I think it's the wrong number. I said, no, Mom, it's Leanne. Who? Your daughter. No, I think it's the wrong number. And then I say, Mom, do you have your hearing aids in? Hearing aids. You know, I'm screaming at a workplace or out in the street. She puts her hearing aids in. We establish that I'm her daughter. And then the conversations have a pretty limited number of topics that we can actually talk about these days. For things that are real, things that are concrete, things that are in front of her that she can see. So sometimes the conversation's like this. Hi, Mom, it's Leanne. Oh, hi. And the first thing she always says is, how's the baby? Every baby in my family is called the baby until the next baby comes, and then they're called the baby. So I always say, oh, she's great. I mean, even if I haven't talked to her, I give her a little story. And then I say something like, have you eaten? And she almost always says, oh, yeah, I made pasta. So I say, great. And then maybe a half an hour later, I have a FaceTime conversation with Joan. And Joan's sitting in her high chair, and she's got food all over, and then I say, just like I speak to my mother, hi, Joan, it's Nani. And then she has, you know, she kind of looks a little bit, and then she says, you know, and then I say, did you eat? And she says, pasta. Recently, she's been saying, red sauce. Or I am on the phone with my mother, whose memory is really going, but there are things that are very important, and one of them is her hair. So I call her, and I'm asking how she is, and she says, oh, you have to make me an appointment. My hair's a mess. Okay, great. Now, she went through 4 hairdressers before she found someone who actually did it the way she liked it. Very important to her. Then maybe the same afternoon, I'm on a FaceTime call with Joan. I say, hi, Joan. What are you doing? And she says, ponies, ponies. Her hair is very important. Or she tells you, cut, you know. So I think, okay, what's going on here? Food, hair, shoes. So my mother just admitted in her 96th year that she's been lying about her height. She always said 5 feet, and she said really she was never more than 4'11" and a half. And now she's about 4'10" and a half. And she's 96 and a half years old and lives on her own. And I said to her, we need to go out to get new shoes, because she insists on wearing little strappy sandals and shoes with no backs because they're stylish and they have a little height. And at giant shoe store, DSW down in Boston, there's racks and racks of shoes, and I pointed to all these sensible shoes, none of which she was interested in. She said, I need a little height. So we managed to get her a pair of shoes that she doesn't really like because she doesn't think they're that stylish. The same evening, I'm on the telephone with Joan, and I say, Joan, how was daycare today? And one of the first things she came home and said to her parents was, Jojo, yellow shoes. And her parents had to sort of dig around and figure out that by mistake, the daycare provider put somebody else's yellow shoes on Joan's feet. And then she couldn't get them off of Joan's feet because Joan really liked them. So even though my mother's memory is, I was saying today, porous would be, that would be very generous. People and their relationships and our family is something that, I pray she has till the very end. So she's always asking, she names everyone. And Joan has now, my husband made for her, a picture of all the important people in her family that's on a magnet, and she places them on the front of the dishwasher, and then she moves them to the stove. And when I'm with her, or when she's at my house, or when I call her, she points. Nani, Yampy, the pets, she knows who everybody is. Well, about a week and a half ago, we got a new phone from my mother, who can't really remember the numbers, and so it has little pictures on the tabs so that she can actually call us, which is working, mezza, what can I say? So these two people in my life, my granddaughter's vocabulary is, I don't know this. I mean, I was a mother, but I was so busy with diapers and, getting them in the car and, boots. Either I wasn't paying attention or I can't remember. Both of those could be true. But I don't remember that language development. I now have all the time to sit with Joan and just focus on her because I don't have to take her to the doctors and I don't have to wash her diapers. I mean, it's a different relationship. And I watch that. It seems like every vocabulary word that Joan is learning, my mother is losing. And it feels like every new skill that Joan is gaining, my mother can no longer do. And I find myself in this incredible position between a 96-and-a-half-year-old and a 1-and-a-half-year-old, even putting them to bed. When Joan is at my house or I'm at her house, I tuck her in and we have a little ritual. And when I visit my mother, I tuck her in. And she feels like I'm the mother and she's the child. And it feels, I pull her blanket up, I make sure she has everything, and I say, is everything okay? And she says, oh, I sleep like a baby, is how she describes it. So I didn't have a grandmother when I was growing up. I didn't watch my mother take care of her mother because her mother was gone from my life. And now I'm the grandmother. I'm also the mother, and I'm also the grandmother that I always wanted to be. Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne. Our last storyteller for tonight is Kevin Gallagher. And he continues the pattern of being the oldest. He's the oldest of three, with 2 younger sisters, one of whom is in the audience today. Hey, hi, thanks for coming. And Kevin also has his own storytelling event in Burlington, and he also tells stories for the Moth in Burlington. Kevin, please come on up. Thank you so much.
Last month, my partner decided to do one of those 23andMe DNA tests for his birthday. And he just recently got the results back. And he's sadly not as Polish as his mother insisted they were for so many years. But my sister-in-law is thrilled because he's 6% Ashkenazi Jew. And so now she's not the only Jewish person in the family. But he asked me this week, he said, do you want to do the 23andMe thing for Christmas, as a Christmas present? And I said, no, because I have been living in my DNA for 6 decades. I don't need a test. You see, my mom is one of 13 children. They were really overachieving Irish Catholics in terms of the propagation of the faithful. My father had a much smaller family, but equally as Irish and Catholic. And so, like, right away, you already know some about my DNA, you know, copious amounts of potatoes, jigs and reels, the Holy Trinity, beer. But unlike the 23andMe, you know, I didn't get a report on my DNA. And so my DNA comes to me from the stories from the original 13 colonies, as I call them. Because the stories that they tell help me appreciate the unique differences that we each have, as well as the painful similarities that we all share. And so one story that my mother is very fond of telling about growing up is they ate in 3 shifts because they didn't have enough dishes or chairs. And my grandfather and the oldest kids would eat in the first shift because they had jobs, and then the babies and the toddlers would eat next because they took a lot of work, and then everyone else would eat after that. The dishes were all done between each shift with water boiled on the stove. My grandmother was sort of a magician in the kitchen, I would imagine. It's sort of a little like the oil in the lamp for Hanukkah, because she would make a meatloaf with 1 pound of Hamburg to serve 15 people. Yeah, and then, of course, a lot of potatoes. And it's funny because my mother will show us pictures of her childhood, her and her siblings, and she'll comment about how fit and healthy they were. And I just sort of wondered if fit and healthy were sort of like pseudonyms for skinny and malnourished in the 1930s and 40s. Like, I guess maybe you just called like really, really skinny people fit, you know, back then. Well, eventually these 13 grew up, and 10 of them got married, so that's my 23andMe. And of course, being very Catholic, they practiced no birth control, except exhaustion and death were the only ways it stopped. And so eventually this sort of green tsunami in my family became the 13, the 10, their 30 offspring, my 31st cousins. And then now my cousins are reproducing at rapid rates as well because they're still uber Catholic. So our number is probably like around about 120 these days. But one of the best ways to actually see your DNA live and in action is Thanksgiving. Because that's like the grand central of holidays. And back in the day, we used to have Thanksgiving at my grandfather's. We would have 4 turkeys cooked in various ovens around the city, 20 or 30 pies. The tables and chairs would either come from the Knights of Columbus or the Elks Club, because they still had problems with chairs in the family. And the tables, the adult table, would snake from the front parlor, where we wake our dead, through the living room, through the downstairs bedroom into the kitchen, and then the kids' table would snake from the back room into the pantry. And if you start at the kids' table, you end at the kids' table. You never really move up in a family this large. You might have a cameo appearance at the adult table, but don't count on it for more than once, maybe in your lifetime. And then, of course, because it is a big celebration in the family, with lots of people, that means there's lots of beer and other spirits. Some people consume more conspicuously, like my Uncle Charlie, who one Thanksgiving sort of was sleeping face first into his potatoes at the dinner table, where his sister said he's very tired. Yeah. Or my grandfather, who made many trips to the pantry to refill his coffee mug, even though the coffee maker wasn't in the pantry. Some drank to remember, some drank to forget, all the same reasons. And guest just drank to survive, because it's like really hard to be with that many people who are related to each other. Well, eventually my grandfather died, and the family was getting so big that really we needed sort of like, Boston Garden to host it in. So the big celebration sort of stopped. But one year in particular, like my Aunt Charlene, who was 11th, I think, of the 13, she wanted to resurrect the home-style version. So people were very excited, although there was a lot of talk about how sad it was that so few could make it, 50. And it's so unfortunate that more people couldn't make the trip, but we'll make do with just 50 people. And so Thanksgiving morning comes, and people are arriving at Charlene's, and she's very happy. And I found myself, I was like, kissing some aunts and hugging some cousins, and I see this group of about 6 or 7 young folks, all with very thick Irish brogues. And so I said to my mom, I'm like, Mom, who are those people over there? And she said, they're the Irish people. And I said, yeah, well, Mom, I know they're Irish, but like, who are they? And she said, I don't know, Charlene got them at the mall. And I said, like in the dumpster? Like, what do you mean she got them at the mall? No, she was at the mall and she was buying something, and one of the gals over there checked her out. And of course, Charlene picked up the brogue and said, where are you from? And what are you doing for Thanksgiving? And they had never been to a Thanksgiving. So she said, why don't you and your friends all come to our house for Thanksgiving? So I said, oh, Mom, that's very nice of Charlene to do that. I said, do you know any of their names? And she said, well, I asked one of the fellows his name, and I think he said Coin. I'm like Coin, C-O-I-N? And she's like, yeah, I don't think that's right, but you'll find when you talk to them, you don't understand a thing that they're saying. So literally all 50 people to this day still call them the Irish people, because they never had names, and no one really talked to them because no one could understand them. Yeah. Well, they were not shy or bashful. They were not intimidated by 50 strangers. And my family loved that we had people from the old sod at the dinner table. Like, that just meant so much to them. But I think what meant more to the Irish people, the lads and lassies, is that they loved how much food there was and how much booze there was. So over the course of a very long day, till evening time, they, with some help, but they polished off every drop of liquor in my aunt and uncle's house, including my uncle's cherished wine collection in the basement that they got into as well. Well, so, they got louder after a while and a little more raucous, and then some furniture found itself broken at one point. It didn't know how it got broken. And so eventually St. Patrick, came in and drove the snakes out of the house, so to speak. And for the rest of the next couple of days, it was fascinating to hear the discussion of the original 13 about, we're not that kind of Irish. Like, we don't take people's alcohol and break their furniture. They said they were from the South, but I bet they're Northern Irish. And so while they were commenting on the unique differences between them and us as Irish people, I couldn't help but be aware of sort of the painful similarities between the Irish people and my Irish people. But one thing about our DNA, for all 100 plus of us, is I could say that we all have the gene Che mille faccia, which is 100,000 welcomes in Gaelic, because we're all pretty hospitable folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. And that was the last story that we have tonight. We hope to see you again at the next Mudroom on March 12th. Remember, the theme is the worst advice. And if you have a story, let us know. The deadline for stories, please, before February 21st, send us an email. Tell us what your story is about, or send us a little audio. And we hope to see you again in March. Thank you for coming.